Hi guys, my name is Robert McFarlane and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be looking at my technique on how to extract an amazing logline from your script. In this lesson, we're going to go over the structure I use to extrapolate from the script exactly the pieces of information required for the logline, kind of enabling you to cut through all of the other mise-en-scène and dialogue and actions and find exactly what your film is about to create your logline. For those of you who don't know what a logline is, first and foremost, it's really hard. It is the single hardest one line you're going to have to write for your entire film. Now the reason for that is because you're going to have to distill a huge amount of information down into that singular line. That line is going to have a lot going for it because ultimately it's the first thing that many people will read about your story, especially those who you want to convince to either invest in your film or be a part of your film, be in the crew or be an actor. So the logline is super important and it's well worth taking the time to get it right. I've kind of come up with my own idea of what a logline should include, and that is the inciting incident, the protagonist, the action, the antagonist, and then the stakes. Now, a lot of the time you'll see a lot of these breakdowns and they have some order of the first four, but not often do they have the stakes. By nailing your logline, you know what your film is and what it isn't, and it becomes kind of a guiding light during your entire process of making the film. It also becomes the guiding light for all of your other team members as well, because you can always refer back to the logline without having to read the entire script. You can make sure that everything serves the purpose of the film you intended to create. So let's take a script. I actually attached it in the description below. Feel free to download it, read it through and follow along. So we're going to go into this. So we're going to start with the inciting incident. At the beginning of this film, the inciting incident is when he is cornered before his gig, right? So we kind of get an idea of this moment which is about to change everything, okay? Now, it's really important to note, where did this happen in your film? Now, if this is a script which is a short film, there is going to be a little bit more flexibility when it comes to structure, but invariably your inciting incident happens at the beginning of the film or a little way in. Now, this script, as you can see, is only 5 pages long, so this inciting incident happens within the first page of the script, which is roughly about right structurally. Now, if you find your inciting incident happens almost at the end of your script, then you really need to start thinking about, okay, well, what's the importance of all this lead up and why can't I have the film start much closer to the inciting incident? What is all of this content for before that moment? And is there any drama happening? Is there any conflict happening? Because ultimately, that's what our audiences want to see. That's what they want. That's what they've come to your film for, because you've told them that there's this question you're asking, and now you're going to show them the answer to that question, the answer to this situation. So ultimately, your trailer or the premise of your logline starts with the point of conflict or the point of change, which is your inciting incident. So if you haven't read the script for Say Much It, you probably know The Godfather, yeah? So the inciting incident for The Godfather is when a godfather has been murdered, all right? That's the inciting incident. That's what's going to cause the action for the rest of the film. Number 2, the protagonist. So straight after your inciting incident, we have the protagonist. So this thing happens to this person. Now, you don't want to say a engineer or Sam or Mark. You don't want to say their name because a name doesn't describe the character. And what's important about this is you have to try and describe the type of person that this inciting incident has happened to. So we start to get an idea of juxtaposition. So let's just say coffee time, sorry. A swimmer finds himself in the middle of a desert. That's a juxtaposition. You've already got an image of what that might look like. Or maybe you find a overweight mathematician in a kung fu contest. So again, you've got a juxtaposition. You've got someone who is very unlikely to be in this situation, or the situation they found themselves in is going to eventually mean that there's going to have to be an action, which we'll get to in a minute. It's important to note that it's going to take you a little time to work out the right word to use for the protagonist, because as you've either written your script or you've started to break down the script that you've received, you're going to find that you can write reams and reams and reams of information about your protagonist. But in the case of this logline, you need to come up with a 1 to 3 word description of your protagonist. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. So you could use words like naive or youthful or wizened or wiry. You want to find words that can construct in the reader's mind the type of person. Don't have to be, this is every nuance of the character. You just need to find an overarching theme which gives us an idea of the conflict that we might end up watching in the film. So in the case of Same Old Shit, the character is a tamed rock star. So immediately you've got this scenario, a rock star who's tamed. Well, then how has he been tamed? That's kind of interesting. And you've got him cornered just before his gig. So what does that mean? How is that going to play out? You'll immediately start the audience asking questions. And that's really important. What you want is to engage the audience's imagination as they read your logline to want to read your full script. Now, if you don't know where that comes from, if you can't work out what this character is, then you're going to have to go back and really do some work on who your lead is. And to do that, you're going to have to start thinking about the character's moral and psychological needs and their desires and their wants and their fears. We're going to go into that at a later date when we actually go through my techniques on how to extrapolate your character from the script. So now, who is the protagonist for The Godfather? So what would be a really great juxtaposition? And that's exactly who they've written into this film. The protagonist is a straight-laced, naive son. So you see how that leads on from our inciting incident? When a godfather or when a mob boss is murdered, their straight-laced, naive son, right, we now understand who this event, this inciting incident, has happened to, and we're starting to get an idea of the world that they're now thrust into. It's really cool. So number 3, the action. This is a little trickier than it sounds, but really go back into your script and analyze all of the actions that the protagonist does from start to finish after the inciting incident. And try and keep in mind what the inciting incident is, who your protagonist is, and then really try to come up with a really brief summary of their actions. In the case of The Godfather, he must get revenge. That's it. That is the core pushing force for the film. In the case of Same Old Shit, he must escape. That's the core force and push for the film. Other films might have slightly more description in, like Star Wars. You'd have Luke Skywalker is going to be a naive warrior, all right, because ultimately that's who he is, must battle the forces of evil to save the galaxy. Number 4, the antagonist. Who is going to be the major force against this action, right? So if you remember, with Godfather, we've got that he gets revenge. Well, who's going to be the person who he gets revenge against? Because they're going to be the main point of conflict. So as you go through your script and you're working out who is your key antagonist, because many scripts will have many antagonists at different points in the script, but who represents the main force against the protagonist? Sometimes that means that that's the person who caused the inciting incident. Sometimes it isn't. Sometimes you'll find that it's a force which comes into play because of the inciting incident. So just keep watch and find in your script ultimately who is the key force against your protagonist. So we know in Same Old Shit, our key antagonist, the only other character in the film, is a disgruntled Uber fan. Now, much like many short films, we can keep the cast nice and small, which keeps the overall action and conflict really nice and clean. It doesn't always mean you have to have a small cast, but for this film, it really worked for us. Now we're on to number 5. We're on to the stakes. This will allow your audience to understand the weight of everything they've read up until this point. So, what have we got up until this point? Let's review. We've got the inciting incident, when he is cornered before a gig. And we've got the protagonist, a tamed rock star. We've got the action, must escape. And then we've got the antagonist, a disgruntled Uber fan. So, what's the stakes of the film? Now, if you've read through the script, you'll see that the stakes for the film for our protagonist is to get back to his gig in time. Now, that gives us immediately a time limit, and audiences love time limits. They love when they realize that there is a limit to how long this battle can go on for. So at the end of the film, our stakes have to ultimately give us what is super important to your characters, so your audience knows what to care about. If they don't care about your characters and their stakes, then ultimately, why would they watch? Now, don't forget, these stakes have to be absolutely integral to your protagonist and somewhat your antagonist. So in Same Old Shit, you've got an Uber fan, a disgruntled Uber fan is confronting and cornering the tamed rock star. So why do you think the disgruntled Uber fan is cornering the tamed rock star? Because he's been tamed. He's no longer this wild and free rock star. So ultimately, by stopping the rock star getting back to his gig, she is forcing him to confront who he has become as a rock star. We are empathic humans. We are empathic beings. And when we see that someone cares about something, we immediately connect to their journey. We immediately connect to them as humans. So when we see that what they want is in danger or they might not get it, we care about their journey to get to what they want. And when they have to struggle through it, we are really actually seeing our own struggles in their struggle. So, and to be honest, audiences love that. They really want to see your characters go through this journey to reach the end goal, to reach their desire, because ultimately we want to know that that's possible for us too. So now, you may or may not have your own script with you, but do take this out and start looking at other films and start applying these rules to the films. So in review, so you've got 1, find your inciting incident. Then find your protagonist. Then what's their action? Then you're going to find the protagonist that will be in between the action and their desire. And then finally, you've got the stakes. And that's going to enable you to fully show your entire film. Ultimately, you want your logline to be able to entice and invigorate your audience to want to watch or read the film wherever your film is at. So let's look at the logline for the script, Same Old Shit. So we have, when he is cornered just before a gig, a tamed rock star must escape a disgruntled Uber fan in order to get to his gig in time. If you have any questions, chuck them in the comments below, and also post your loglines. I'd love to read about your films below.